Perfect. Welcome back. My name is Alex Adams, and we have some exciting news about our podcast. We've actually rebranded, and now we're called Behind the Play. Our podcast will look at sports through analysis and interviews of people in the sports world. And I'm very excited for our special guest this week, Vivek Jacob, to come on and talk about his career in sports journalism, the Raptors, some tennis. Obviously, we're going to talk about the departure of Roger Federer from the game of tennis. Vivek has worked for The Athletic, Sportsnet, Yahoo, Vice, and now is working for CBC Sports, Raptors.com, Complex. I hope I'm not missing anything. I'm just trying to do well. So how's it going?
No, you got all of them. Very impressive, and thank you for the intro. It's very kind of you. Happy to be a part of this.
Mhm.
You've had some cool guests, so excited to chat sports with you. I know we kind of go back and forth from time to time on Twitter and
Yeah,
enjoy those
just
chats.
I didn't know you until today, but through Twitter we've had many exchanges, mostly about tennis, I would say, a
Yeah.
little basketball. Obviously we're both kind of sports heads, and yeah, and I just wanted to kind of get started. Where did your kind of love of sports come from?
Um, it probably started with tennis
Okay.
because my dad used to play, and so that was something that he encouraged me to play initially, and then funnily enough, they kind of kept cricket away from me
Okay, cool.
um, because they figured like having an Indian background that if
Mhm.
I learned about it, that I would just be addicted to it, and
Mhm. Yeah, yeah,
like they didn't want my uh, studies to suffer.
yeah.
So eventually, I did discover cricket
Mhm.
when I was about 9 or 10 years old, but it started with tennis, and then the
Did you
first uh, FIFA World Cup I saw was in 1998.
wow.
So,
Wait, were
um,
you like at home watching it, or like you went there?
no, I was at home watching. So, like that was my first taste of World Cup action. Like I would have started just getting into soccer a couple of years before that, and I actually had a couple of friends who were already like more into soccer than me and were Manchester United fans, and that's kind of how I became a Manchester United fan.
In the
Um,
golden years? Yeah.
yeah, and so like watching that World Cup like took it to another level, um, and then uh, all those sports sort of came together, and so those were the main sports that I played, and like I played from my school,
Mhm.
and then after I came here to Canada in 2002,
Mhm.
I played for my school in cricket
Mhm.
and tennis, and then soccer. I tried out and I made the team, and then I had to quit because it had pretty much an identical schedule with the cricket team,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
so I had to choose. And the cricket team was really good, and
Mhm.
I figured I had a better chance of like winning
Yeah,
something with the cricket team.
yeah.
So I was like, that's fine.
No, no. I actually I don't know if most like I actually I lived in New Zealand, so I know cricket pretty well actually. Been
Okay,
to
cool,
matches, and I went to a couple tests there when I lived there. So it's a
awesome,
fun sport. I really like it. It's um
yeah.
I somehow got really into the test matches. I loved.
Oh wow.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I don't know how I did it, but when I was 13, 15, and when I lived there, I loved watching it and kind of going on the bike and doing homework and stuff. I don't know. I'm sure it's much more fun to play, but yeah.
Yeah, I loved playing the game, and then like I played through university as well. Like I was
Mhm.
playing club level, um and then was like kind of on this path to like potentially play for Canada and stuff like that.
Wow. Okay.
um but it's really interesting that you got into test matches, because usually
I know.
you know, fans who are like really new at a later age, they kind of get into the T20 or like the 1 day game
Yeah.
first, and like tests it's like, oh, 5 days, how do people
Yeah.
do it, that type of thing.
Yeah.
um
Yeah. No, I found it really kind of like baseball, obviously much longer, but there's kind of a patience to it, and kind of I found it more interesting that way. It felt more tactical, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the one thing I always say is like sports in general can mimic life,
Hmm.
but test cricket for me is probably the closest to life in that, you know, it
Hmm.
is spread out and you are going to have like
Ups and downs.
ups and downs. And then, you don't necessarily win or lose at the end of it, right? Like some
Mhm.
days you're just happy to get through with a draw.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the one thing I didn't like about it was if you got rained out, it
Yeah,
just
the rain is
that
definitely frustrating.
that's I thought like I don't mind if it's 5 days and we can't do it, but yeah, anyways,
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that.
yeah. Just to kind of move, so you just mentioned how you played obviously tennis and cricket and some soccer as well. When you were growing up, did you kind of like when did you kind of first think you might pursue a kind of a career in sports journalism?
That didn't happen until much, much later
Okay.
because I think the way I was raised, it was always to see sports as a hobby.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as a little kid, you like dream of different things like lifting the Wimbledon trophy and like playing in a World Cup and all of that stuff. But um, it was always looked at as a hobby. And so, like, education was how you built your
Mm-hmm.
career and that type of thing. So, I went to U of T for economics actually,
Okay.
and uh, after I graduated, I worked in finance for about 5 years. At about year three and a half, I
Mhm.
realized that this wasn't what I wanted to do for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
So, I obviously I always had this passion for sports, and um, I did have a passion for writing about sports, and
Mhm.
so I had started my own blog, and
Okay.
I had reached a point where I knew that I wasn't going to be able to genuinely answer the question of whether I could make it or not in the sports journalism industry if I didn't go all in.
Mhm.
And so that's when I quit the finance industry and just like focused on writing. And I went back to Centennial
Okay.
because they had a 1 year program in sports journalism.
Mhm.
And so I studied that, got an internship at Sportsnet, and that's how I was there for a bit.
Okay.
And
Wow.
then the athletic stuff came along, and then Yahoo, and here we are now.
Wow. So when did you start at Sportsnet, and was that kind of did that feel like how did that feel to
Sports.
get your kind of start in the industry?
Yeah, so the way that Centennial program works is there's 2 semesters and then the internship,
Oh.
or it's like 2.5 semesters and then the internship.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and so my end goal was always like you gotta land that internship, right? So
Yeah.
whatever I could do those first 2.5 semesters to create an impression, I was doing. Um, and then yeah, fortunately got in with the Sportsnet digital team,
Mhm.
and it's a 3 month internship. So just uh tried to minimize mistakes and like
Mhm.
show that I could help as much as I could, and they were happy with me and they kept me around.
Mhm.
And
And
uh
and what
Go
kind
ahead.
of stuff were you like? Were you making content? Were you editing? What kind of stuff were you doing?
So initially you're mainly editing.
Mhm.
Um, if there's like small breaking news and stuff like that, you would make sure you got the breaking news out and you'd have a quick
Mhm.
one liner on it,
Mhm.
and then you'd fill it out later, or someone else,
Mhm.
if it's big NBA news, then it usually be like the main NBA editor who then like writes out the story and whatnot. Um, so yeah, it was mainly like very news desky and just like editing stuff that comes in and just making sure all the latest news is up on the site. And then as you gain that trust, you can make pitches and
Mhm.
they'll approve some, they'll reject some, and you just kind of go from there.
And was it kind of linear? Like, did you feel as though kind of you got in, built trust, and then kind of went up? Yeah.
So, in terms of the trust and being able to do more work for them, absolutely.
Mhm.
But in terms of my position, that was the same. So
Mhm.
I got more responsibility and stuff like that. But in terms of positions and moving up, that was always, job availability as it is in
Yeah.
this industry is pretty. Uh, pretty low at the best of times. So there wasn't really jobs to move into. And then, you know, uh, it ironically, there was a job that I wanted that I applied for, and
Mhm.
at the same time, Yahoo came with their offer,
Okay. Yeah.
and that was much more uh, of what I wanted, where I was gonna get to work with Will,
Yeah.
um, as sort of this dynamic duo and
And
cover the
when
championship season.
and okay, I was gonna ask when was that? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, great. And I
Yeah,
think you wrote a bit for The Athletic that year, is that correct?
yeah. So it happened. It all happened pretty quickly because I would have started that Sportsnet internship around November of 2017,
Mhm.
and then I was there for a year, and then that the beginning of the 2018-19 season was when I got in with the Athletic, and then a bit later the Yahoo offer came, and yeah.
I guess just to kind of wrap this up a little bit just about your career, I kind of wanted to know, I know looking at your LinkedIn, you mentioned that you're a self-starter, and I just wanted to know what kind of advice would you give to young journalists coming up?
I would say number one above everything is get your reps.
Hmm.
Uh no matter what. I think uh it's nice to say, hey, you should never work for free. Um, but I think that is still currently the reality of the industry,
Yeah.
right? And so there's a lot of things that we can wish for and hope that we're different. But if you can't get that paid opportunity, that shouldn't stop you from getting your reps in, putting your content out, and showing what you can do,
Yeah.
because that can go a long way. For me, uh, when I had left the finance industry and I was going all in with my blog, that was a huge blessing in disguise, because I had this blog that no one was reading except like my close friends and family. And there were all these mistakes that I got to make that
Yeah.
once that opportunity came with Sportsnet, I wasn't making. Right.
Mhm.
And frankly, if I had made those mistakes during my internship, they probably wouldn't have kept me on.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And the other thing I would say is, in the past, it might have been enough to just be a good writer or just be a good podcaster. I think now we're at a point where you've got to show that you can do different things, right? Ideally, if you can write well, podcast well, have good video hits, all of
Mhm.
that together, then you're putting yourself in a really good position.
Yeah. No, no. I just to kind of like, not that I'm nearly at your stature, but I know I started this podcast, I think February 2021, and I feel 10 times better. And I did kind of the same thing. I just did it with friends, and they weren't necessarily the best podcasts. They weren't terrible, but I felt as though, like, compared to like now, I feel so much more confident and kind of feel I understand how like a podcast works. I wish I had your ability of writing, but but yeah, no. So I definitely understand that. So I just want to transition a little bit to what you've been covering lately, and I read your article in Complex about Bianca Andreescu, and I just wanted to know how that kind of piece came together and what the process was like to write that story.
So yeah, with this story for Bianca, one thing with Bianca I've been tracking is just sort of her patience through dealing with the adversity that she's had to deal with, whether
Mhm.
it's the physical injuries, the mental health stuff that she's been coping with. And so um I would looked back on the last uh National Bank Open and watched
Yeah.
some of her interviews from that. And right from her first interview here, uh, it was just night and day.
Hmm.
And so that's what sparked my curiosity. Um, One thing that I will say that comes off in this story, that I would again advise to anyone looking to make it in the industry is whatever you're curious about, know that if you are genuinely curious and passionate about that question or subject, there will absolutely be others who are just as curious or passionate
Mhm.
about it and want to know about it.
Mhm.
It's very easy to question yourself in terms of your curiosity and be like, oh, but is this something the public wants to know about? Right.
Mhm.
And so that was something that I learned uh, fairly quickly being in the industry. And so that's something that I would share as well. And so, yeah, that was something that I was curious about. And so uh, I had asked her about that. And then, you just sort of track the timeline and then you see, the coaching change,
Yeah.
uh, the, you know, the strength and conditioning coach come in and all of that. So you just try to understand how all of that comes together and how it's changed things.
I thought when I read it, I really thought how much it touched upon mental health. And I thought, because it talks about her meditating and kind of being with her family more and focusing on herself. And I think my kind of question to you is, what do you find, or what do you think the role is as a sports journalist now, with mental health being so much more prevalent in the discussion? What do you think the role of a journalist is to cover athletes with mental health or in that kind of scope?
So I think the role of the journalist, regardless of the subject, is to tell the truth.
Hmm.
Um, and I think sometimes journalists go in with preconceptions and they want to tell this angle or this version of the truth that they believe is true.
Hmm.
Uh, and so I think the more we get away from that as a collective, um, the better. I think that uh, there are times where you can see in interviews where some journalists almost treat uh, that opportunity to interview an athlete as this sort of adversarial interaction.
Yeah.
And that is something that definitely frustrates me. And
Hmm.
maybe that was something that was tolerated in the past, but I think because of the player empowerment that we've seen, um, maybe more so in certain leagues than others, uh, athletes are more in tune with that stuff. And when they, sense the BS, they cut it out.
Hmm. No, I just when you mentioned that, I thought about Bianca, obviously Bianca Andreescu, but Naomi Osaka, especially just in the game of tennis and it becoming more prevalent. And yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's especially also, I think, I don't know how you found it going from obviously during the pandemic covering sports, but it going when people were obviously what's the right word, quarantining, sorry.
Yeah.
And obviously the effects that had on people's mental health and athletes. So I think it's definitely tough, but I think you're right. I don't think it should be adversarial unless that kind of it's brought upon, I guess, but otherwise it shouldn't be. I guess I just wanted to kind of move forward a little bit to the retirement of Roger Federer. And obviously, it's a huge change in the game of tennis. Obviously, as well, Serena retired. I was fortunate to watch one of her matches, which was pretty crazy. And I just wanted to know how you like. There's a clear generational change in tennis happening, and I really wanted to focus on Federer first, just because it just happened. Um, uh, where do you see Federer in the all-time rankings in men's tennis, and when you judge the best players of all time, is it purely on majors or do you find it to be more than that?
So I'll answer the second question first.
Okay. Thank you.
I do think it's definitely more than majors. I think, whether it's the consistency of, how long you've been number one, how long you've been in the top five, all of that stuff, I think matters. I think your performances in masters events, I think that's something that is still a huge missed opportunity for tennis as the whole in terms of how they sell Masters events to casual fans. And absolutely, you know, casual fans need to look at more than just the slams. Like those Masters events mean so much to the players, and so they should mean just as much to the fans as well. And so I think that's something, you know, the 9 Masters for the men is something I definitely look at when I look at the best years that Roger or Rafa or Novak have had. I don't just look at, oh, how did they do in the 4 slams? I look at the Masters. I look at the ATP finals and assess it that way. And so having said all that, I do think that Novak has surpassed Rogers' on-field accomplishments or on-court accomplishments. I think between Rafa and Roger, it's really interesting because one thing when I look back on their head-to-head, and that's one thing a lot of people point out, right, is that Rafa has the head-to-head. So why would you say that that Rafa hasn't surpassed him or that it's even close? And the reason I say it's close is because of how infrequently they've met outside of the French Open at the slams, right? And so you look at the fact that they've never played at the US Open, right?
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Yeah,
those peak years of Roger, you know, where he won 5 straight US Opens, I'm sure he would have loved to play Rafa there. You know, and so Wimbledon, they've only had, was it the 3 meetings, possibly 4.
Yeah, they met. I think they played recently, like 2019 or 18.
Yeah, so they played in the semis there, and then there's the 2 finals that they played as well.
I think it was 3 finals. I think it was 06, 07, and then Nadal won 08, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, you know what? You are right. Yeah. So, so when you look at all of that, like Rafa has the head-to-head in slams, if I'm not mistaken, 10-4, but 6-0 is at the French Open.
Yeah.
So we know Rafa absolutely on clay. He's the god. Can't be touched. But I think if you were to look back and say, oh, they've played 6 times on this one surface and the other 3 slams just 8 times combined, something's a little off there, right? Rafa has never in his career has never missed the French Open. But he's been injured for these other events. And he's had times where he's had the early exits as well, right? Wimbledon, he had that extended stretch. I think it was a 4-year stretch where he didn't get past the 4th round. So those are things where if Rafa were to get to that point, quarters, semis, more likely semis and finals where he was playing them, then what would the head-to-head look like, right? Like Roger and Novak, especially of late, you know, they've kept getting deep enough where they play Rafa in the semis or the final of the French Open. And so they're putting themselves in that position to and they're taking the L. And so I feel like that part of it kind of gets missed, right? We miss the stuff that doesn't show, right? Like stats only shows you what's happening.
I always thought about this in terms of the Federer Nadal debate is that Federer hit Nadal at the supremacy of Nadal on clay, right? And I think how many kind of Roland Garroses would a Federer won if Nadal wasn't like if you look at that kind of what stretch like 06 to maybe 2011-ish, like just like you couldn't even touch him. Not that he hasn't won since, but but they've become, I feel like over the years, he became a bit less dominant, right? And I just see that as kind of like Novak kind of hit him at the end a little bit, still super dominant. But I think what I always think about is kind of the age range between, and I find I
think that's where the important thing to remember is the age difference between Roger and these two.
Yeah.
So a little plug, I'm actually writing
Okay.
something that's looking at these three
Mm-hmm.
and just all these different comparisons. So some of these stats that I'm referring to is what I've dug up.
Yeah.
Um, and I do believe that in tennis, the generations sort of come in every sort of 5 year block.
Mm-hmm.
And so while Roger, Rafa, and Novak are obviously rivals, I don't think that Roger is from the same generation as Rafa and Novak. Like
Mm-hmm.
Rafa and Novak are 86 and 87 born. Federer was born in 1981, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, uh, the same way that uh, LeBron James and Paul Pierce can be rivals because they played each other so many times in the postseason, you wouldn't ever say that they're from the same generation.
No. Yeah. Yeah. And that's a really good comparison. I love the NBA comparison, but I totally agree. Like I think it would be obviously much more fair to put Andy Murray in that conversation. I don't I think he's the same age as
Yeah,
Djokovic. I'm not sure, but
he is.
so that kind of makes sense. And obviously, you look at his career; he almost in any other era would have been probably close to 10 slams,
Yeah,
presumably, right? And so that's the kind of interesting debate I think about kind of who's the best. I know it's my bias, but I still feel Federer just overall, if you put him in his prime, probably is the best. But for me, I think Djokovic kind of that 2015 might be the highest level of tennis ever when he won the what is it, Golden Slam? I forget. There's always a name for it, but when he won all
he.
four in a row.
Uh, so they call it the Nole Slam, the
Yeah.
same way they called Serena when she won her four in a row, the
Mhm.
Serena Slam, because it's not the calendar slam. He didn't win all four in the same year, right? Like he won Wimbledon and US in 2015, and then he won Australian and French
Yeah.
in
I remember
2016.
I remember him losing to Query in 2016, just like in such a
Yeah,
crazy, yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Um, so no, I'm with you. I think that stretch from 2015 to 2016, Novak just seemed untouchable.
Hmm.
And again, when you look back at the Masters events as well, he was winning pretty much all of them.
All of them, yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of like and he was still in the prime of Nadal. Like Nadal would have been what, 28, 29, right?
Yeah,
It's not as though he wasn't hitting kind of a counterpart at the same time.
yeah, and I believe during that stretch he had created the largest ever gap
Yeah.
between number one and number two.
Yeah.
Um, and so I believe Andy Murray was number two at the time, and Novak had like more than double his points
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
ATP.
Yeah. Yeah. So oh man. So just to kind of my Zoom's kind of acting up, so it's saying I have to upgrade. So, anyways, I'll figure it out. So, I just to move on to Canadian tennis a little bit. I wanted to know kind of how you see the game. Like, I wanted to basically ask you, with Layla and Bianca doing very well recently in the women's game, and obviously Dennis and Felix doing very well in the men's game, although maybe not the best years this year. Who do you think kind of will have the best career? I think that's kind of a question I've been thinking about, kind of for Canadian tennis.
Best year in 2023, I will go with Bianca Andreescu.
Okay. And can I kind of have a reason as to why?
So with Felix, I would say that I think he's going to have a very good year.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
just think that this might be the last year of Novak and Rafa really going at it.
Okay.
And so I still think, I know Alcaraz won the US Open, and a lot of people are saying this is the changing of the guard and the next
Yeah.
generation is here.
Hmm.
But I do feel that it's a
Hmm.
couple of years away
Right.
from this being Alcaraz's
kind of.
show.
Yeah. No, I get that. Yeah, no, I feel with Alcaraz, I guess we can touch upon it a little bit. I what I really just think is so great about him is his mentality, right? Like
Hmm.
he obviously has probably the best game right now in the world, other than maybe Djokovic. But just the way he won that center match, the way he won a bunch of against Tiafo, even against Rude, right? Like he was kind of, it was a bit worrisome in that third set. So um, I feel like he could I think he's obviously the next generation, but at the same time, I feel like he could be one of those guys like Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic. I don't know what you think about that, but I definitely feel like that could be the case for
He definitely feels like the next great.
him. Hmm.
And so I don't want to set this impossible standard that, oh, because Roger and Rafa Nadal and Djokovic all won 20 plus,
Hmm.
that now anyone who falls short of that isn't a great.
Yeah.
I think, if you win 7 plus, 8 plus, like you are an all timer,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Like Agassi won 8.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone looks at him and says, "Oh, that's not an all-time great."
Yeah. No, not at all. And
So, so I would say that with Alcaraz, I definitely see him as a multi-slam winner.
hmm
I see him winning more than 5, and then what he does beyond that, we'll wait and see.
hmm Yeah, no,
But I will say, if he somehow ended up with like less than 4 or 5, that would be a disappointment based on what we've seen so far.
yeah. I feel like maybe the over under might be like kind of, if you're being really kind of sports booky, might be like 10, maybe, if that makes any sense, because
Yeah,
you have to take in like injuries and who knows what kind of happens. Maybe there's another Alcaraz in 5 years, right?
right.
Something like that. But I
Yeah.
feel like that's maybe the safe over under, if that makes any sense. Yeah.
No, I agree with you. Yeah, 9.5 sounds like a good number.
Yeah. Um, can I just pause quickly because I'm getting weird Zoom, my
Yeah,
Zoom.
no, for sure. Whatever you got to do.
And just to kind of continue the discussion about kind of Canadian tennis, and you mentioned Bianca, and you thought like she'd have the best year. Is there kind of a player that you think, like, do you feel that Dennis and Felix, they've kind of been very wobbly recently, in different ways? Do you like, how do you kind of see their games right now? You can take whichever one you want to start, but yeah.
So I think with Dennis, the thing that I find frustrating is that he has not sort of matured his game.
Yeah.
Like the same weaknesses that we identified 3, 4 years ago are still the same weaknesses now.
Hmm.
And he still seems like that kid who, when he gets on a hot streak and he's lining up the ball exactly, the way he wants to, then he's going to be tough to beat. And I think he made a good decision to team back up with Mikhail
Yeah.
Yuzny.
Yeah, saw him at the Open, and I actually watched this first round match, and again, I got there midway through the second set. He had lost the first set badly, and just kind of when he brought it all together, he was winning, and when he wasn't, he wasn't, right? And it was
Yeah,
just as simple as that, right?
yeah.
Uh,
And so with Felix, I feel like every year we've seen a progression in some aspect of his game, and especially the serve. Like that was such a critical component of his game that he needed to improve.
mhm,
And so I feel like he has taken that up a notch. I think there's some of that mental aspect that he needs to continue to improve. I think he's made strides in terms of his mental toughness and uh, how he can work his way through matches. Like I thought when he beat Sinner in Cincinnati, I thought
mhm.
that was really encouraging to sort of come back from that hole that he was in and turn it around. to win his first ATP title. That was a big deal as well. So I think there are these very encouraging signs, but then he's had these lulls where he has these defeats that you can't really explain.
No.
And again, I go back to when you look at the guys who are consistently at the top, and obviously, again, it's the big three that you talk about the most.
Mhm.
They know how to win with their B and C game.
Yeah.
Sometimes even D game. And that's something Felix has to figure out, where sometimes you see that he doesn't have that A or B game, and you can see it in his face that
Yeah.
like, oh my God, I don't know what the answer is.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's where even showing that to your opponent is a bad thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess just I don't know if you've been watching or following the Davis Cup. Like, it's literally on right now.
Yeah, he'll be taking on Alcaraz.
Yeah, he's about to Pospisil's playing Bautista Agut in a third set right now. But I just wanted to know how you, for that match today, just kind of what your thoughts on. I mean, by the time this comes out, we'll know the score. But do you think that's a very kind of like almost a measuring stick match for him, kind of just see where he is, where his game's at?
So the one thing I'm curious about with this match is whether Alcaraz might be a bit fried.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot to go through, to win your first Grand Slam and all the media obligations that come with that. And so I wonder if he's going to be a bit overcooked
Mm-hmm.
for this one, and maybe that gives Felix an edge. So, and I will say, I don't know if the Davis Cup means as much to this generation as maybe it did 20 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. But he is playing it, so that
Yeah,
is
he is
something.
playing it, which is significant.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't use this as a measuring stick match, is basically what I'll say. It's an important match, but I think in terms of assessing Felix next year, I just don't want to see those inexplicable losses.
Yeah.
Right.
And I find we've exchanged about this. I find it's not just that he loses to someone he shouldn't lose, but there doesn't seem to be kind of a like a little fight at the end. Or I felt that, especially obviously the Rude match at the Rogers Cup was just terrible, but there wasn't even a kind of, oh, I'm down 4-love double break, but I fight it back to kind of 4-3 and then lose 6-3 because I ran out of time. Obviously, there's no time in tennis, but you get my point. And
Yeah.
against Draper at the U.S. Open, again, like he just got broken once. He never broke.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that worries me is more there needs to be that kind of ability to fight back a little bit, even if you'd lose with the B or C game, but the kind of wound up. And I don't know how you think about this, but do you feel he should be almost a bit more emotional on court just to kind of rev himself up? I know Raonic back in the day, he was very similar where, and I was a big fan because I'm tall and not super athletic and big forehand, big serve. So is that kind of something you think is important?
Yeah, I've borrowed the Greg Popovich quote before with the "I need some nasty."
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
Felix could definitely use a bit of that. And I think Chapo has some of that. I think when we talk about his potential, like you see it in those big matches where he does get up for them, and he kind of embraces and enjoys that big stage. And so with Felix, maybe there are those moments where, let's be honest, even at the Australian Open, where once Medvedev seemed to have had made his adjustments,
There wasn't.
and Felix didn't have that counter,
Yeah.
right? Like he should have won that match.
Yeah.
We excuse it because Medvedev is so great on hard courts, and Felix is still learning. He's still got a bit of time before like he really needs to show what he's about. And so we say it's okay, but at the end of the day, he should have won that match.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think he would have been the final. I don't know if he would have beaten Nadal, but I think
Yeah,
it would have been Tsitsipas, who he actually plays pretty well against, and
right.
in that form, I think I completely agree. I think the one match where I felt that's perfect, great, don't it was the Nadal match. I don't know how you felt about that, but I thought like still when Rafa played his best, you could kind of tell he was a bit better than Felix, but Felix like especially winning that fourth set and being competitive in the fifth, I thought that was a really kind of pivotal moment. And then since then, it's just been a lull, it feels like. So it's just a weird, I find him so frustrating and great guy. I just mean,
Yeah.
it's frustrating. So I guess just to kind of wrap up this part, where do you kind of, what do you think is kind of I guess what do you expect from Felix and Dennis next year on the tour?
I think realistically, Felix should be setting a goal of being in the top 5 next year.
Mm-hmm.
You know, assuming, you know, if you assign 4 spots to Novak, Rafa, Alcaraz, and Medvedev,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Felix should be saying that 5th spot is mine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so whether it's a Tsitsipas or a Sinner or a
Mm-hmm.
Zverev that he's going up against, he should be looking at those guys and saying, absolutely, I'm better. And I think that's something that we need to see next year is the belief. Like I would say in the case of someone like Francis Tiafoe, like what was so impressive when he beat Rafa was the fact that even when Rafa had those moments where he seemed, and even the crowd seemed to be like, oh, okay, Rafa's getting into this thing now. Tiafoe was like, no, I'm gonna win this match.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is such a big component of this. And so next year, whether it's Alcaraz, whoever it might be, Felix needs to go in with the belief that he's better than them, that he can beat them,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
no
No,
matter what the set score is at any stage.
yeah, yeah. I think for Dennis, just to kind of to go to that, I think the recent form since kind of Canada, I think has been like better. Like I feel he's been playing kind of top 10, 20
I agree.
player. And I think it's just for him, it's almost the opposite of Felix in terms of attitude. I think that's successful for him. It says like I know he's playing well when he's just hitting rally balls. It's the weirdest thing I find. He's just like, okay, I'm just going to be consistent, get into the point, and then obviously he's big enough to, or his shots are big enough, sorry, to move the player around, get winners, but he'll feel comfortable. And I think that's the biggest key is just play consistent, and then like he's fearless in a good way, but it's also kind of his worst enemy at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you said it perfectly. Like, hey, when you're on that hot streak, absolutely ride it, enjoy it, but don't be looking for it. Like when you're not in it, just embrace that too, and say,
Mhm.
okay, I just got to grind here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I was really upset about his loss to Rublev. But he played well. Like I think, and he fought. And again,
Yeah.
that's the thing you were mentioning earlier that he kind of has that you kind of want a bit more from Felix. So, anyways, I want to transition a little bit to the Raptors.
Let's
I
do it.
actually just recognized you from covering. I think it was the men's national team for North Pole Hoops last summer. I think that's when I first kind of
Okay.
yeah. So I just I wanted to know kind of firstly, I know you were on the Will Lose show about I don't know 3-4 weeks ago, and you mentioned that you thought the Raptors this year would be a 50-55 win team. Kind of that's what you expect. And I just wanted you to kind of elaborate on why and kind of how you see the team going into this year.
So for one thing, uh, they pride themselves on defense, and so I have a lot of belief in those teams. And so when you look at the first couple months of last season, there was a lot of teaching that was going on because it was an extremely young team, new faces in the rotation, and you saw a lot of big mistakes, right? And that reflected in their defensive rating, all of that. You look at their numbers, pretty much since the start of the new year, or December 29th, December
Yeah.
31st, whatever it might be. And they finished the season 34-17, if I'm not mistaken. They were in about the top 6 in defense, and it's the offense that needed work, right? It was pretty much just get the ball to Pascal and
Yeah. And
hope for the best.
get Fred in transition on those threes and
Yeah,
stuff like that. Yeah.
yeah. And so when I look at the fact that they were on 34-17 is pretty much a 52 plus win pace.
Mhm.
And so when I look at that, when I look at the fact that they were on that pace with a Fred VanVleet who is struggling with injury, with an OG Anunoby who barely played after the All-Star break. It was either 6 or 7 games that he played after the All-Star break.
Yeah.
And
And Fred was banged up.
exactly.
Yeah.
He shot around 24-25% from 3 after the All-Star break.
Mhm.
So when I take those 2 factors and say, okay, if they can be healthy for the whole season, the additions of Otto Porter Jr.,
Mhm.
I hope that Precious Achua starts. I think that's the best
Yeah.
way for the Raptors to go, and have Gary Trent Jr. come off the bench. That's obviously going to be an
Interesting.
interesting conversation to have with Gary.
Yeah.
But I think there's a way to sell him on it as well, in terms of being a 6th man and providing that spark off the bench. And so, you've got Thad Young around for a whole season. This is Pascal's first off season, since 2019.
Fully healthy too.
Fully healthy. So I think he's going to come back an even better player. And so for those reasons, my expectations going in are that they'll be a 50 win plus team. And one of the other notes I made on Will Lou's podcast is about, how they underachieved against sub 500 teams.
Yeah. The Detroit. I know Will Lou always, but Detroit, yeah. I even went
Yeah.
down the championship year and watched them in Detroit, and they lost, and they were with, anyways, that's not the point, but if they can just, and the worst thing is Detroit's getting better, right? So
Yeah, that Dwayne Casey voodoo.
yeah. But no, I actually I agree with you. I think my only kind of not worry, but it's not that I don't think they're a 50 win team in terms of, I think everything you mentioned, they should be a top 5 or 6 defensive team. Again, the problem is, where do they get that half court offense, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think, and I'll touch upon it a bit later with Scotty Barnes and stuff like that. My question to you a little bit is, with obviously the Cavs adding Mitchell recently and just the East being so deep, is that kind of, where do you see them in the standings this year? And that's my kind of worry, I guess, about the 50 to 55 win team, is just the East is so deep. You don't have any kind of Detroit. I mean, that's a bad example, but yeah, bad teams.
Yeah, so I think the one interesting thing to note with these games against sub 500 teams, if you look at seasons past where the Raptors have been really, really great, um, they've played almost somewhere between 38 to 40 games against sub 500 teams.
Mhm.
And if you look at the last season, it was down to about 32.
Wow. Okay.
So there's less of the bad teams available, right? And so does it continue to trend that way? I think that's where the play-in tournament has helped.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get more of these competitive teams. But I also think there's going to be a bunch of bad teams this year. I do expect the Wizards to be really bad.
Okay.
The Magic, the Pacers, the Hornets.
Yeah.
And then you look over at the West as well.
OKC now.
OKC, the Rockets,
Spurs.
Spurs. You look at the Blazers. We don't really know what's going to happen with that situation.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, they've tried to appease Damian Lillard with some wings, and we'll see how that plays out. But
Yeah.
I don't expect much from them either. So I still think there's enough of the bad teams around. And the one thing that you're right in wondering about is, can they sustain the performance that they had against plus 500 teams?
Yeah.
They were very good against plus 500 teams.
Yeah.
And so sustaining that, to me, is more of a question mark than, hey, can they be better than they were last year against sub 500 teams?
Yeah. And I guess just to kind of go back to their kind of the Raptors philosophy, I'm kind of curious, like, do you believe people like in Raptor world have talked about this a lot? Do you believe in the 6'9" Masai kind of strategy, where, just for listeners who are maybe a bit less aware or unaware of what I'm referring to, is that you get a bunch of 6'8", 6'9" wings and you just play amazing defense. You don't really care if they can shoot that well. Not that they're necessarily non-shooters, and kind of build a team that way. Do you think that can be kind of an effective strategy? I don't mean necessarily that means they win the championship this year or even next, but what are your kind of thoughts on that?
So I feel that should not be confused with how they want the finished product of these 6'8", 6'9" players to look.
Okay.
I think they're okay with having that be the base. They not even okay. They definitely want that to be the base. That 6'8", 6'9" with 7 foot plus wingspan, and then is able to switch over and defend multiple positions. That is definitely what they want as the base to build from. But they are absolutely looking to build their shooting mechanics and all of that, and they have a track record in doing that, right? And so I think that's where you'll see it come along. I mean, even with Precious Achua, we saw it come along.
Crazy. It was so weird. I all of a sudden went from don't to shoot it, right? Like,
yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And so I think they believe that they can develop those aspects. And then I also believe that because that is the most in-demand sort of body prototype, they feel like acquiring as many of those as possible first, and then using whatever's left over on a 7-footer, on a point guard, whatever it may be, they're comfortable with going that way.
Yeah.
And so I think some people, even after Christian Coloco was drafted, were like, and watching him, were saying, oh, how did this guy drop out of even the top 20, right? And for me, the way I looked at it was, all these other teams don't have enough wings. And so that was still a priority for them in the draft. And so you saw all these wing players go, whereas the Raptors have set themselves up so nicely now, where they can say, okay, a rookie contract is a perfect way to address the center position, because we don't want to commit 20 million to that position.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fantastic point. Honestly, I never thought about that. I always just think about it as there's a lot of dumb teams in the NBA. That's maybe a bit too strong a word, but it's kind of like the Bill Simmons thing, that there's a bunch of dumb teams. But I think they're just so smart, and it'll be interesting to see. I think there will be a really good team, but I want to transition a bit more to the players. But I do think that the interesting thing, and we talked about it with the KD rumors and stuff like that. I guess actually I'll ask this question now. Do you think kind of a guy, like, there's been a bit of rumors about Shea, and I'm just curious, not necessarily about him or if you know anything about him, but in terms of a trade with the Raptors, but do you think they're close to that time where they have to put all the chips in, or a lot of chips in, for a guy like Shea? And what kind of player would you want to be added to this team? Because I think we'd probably agree they're not close. They're not really close to being a championship level team.
Yeah, I think if the opportunity presents itself, they will be ready. And we saw it play out with the KD situation. right? Player of that magnitude is available. They're going to offer what they believe is a fair offer. At the same time, they are very happy with their core and what they have. And so there's a line that they're not willing to cross.
Yeah.
That line probably gets pushed a bit further for a guy like Shea, who is so young still, doesn't have an Achilles injury behind him to worry about, those sorts of things.
And maybe kind of drama attached.
Yeah, exactly. And so you're probably willing to put a lot on the line for him.
Mm-hmm.
And my perspective on Shea has been that how much longer is he going to put up with OKC situation? Because I'm from if I'm in his shoes and I'm looking at that draft class and I'm seeing Luka Doncic do what he's doing in the playoffs, Trae Young get playoff opportunity, DeAndre Ayton go to the finals,
Jaren Jackson, bunch
yeah. So I'm looking at those guys and I'm saying, man, like I want to show that I belong on that stage too, and I belong in those conversations too, right? Like Shea right now, as good as he is getting left out of some of these conversations because of the team he plays for.
He's kind of DeJounte Murray last year with bad PR, kind of like just
Yeah.
because. I mean, not that the Spurs were that great, but they were at least a competitive team,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So
That's a great way to put it.
yeah. So I just think I completely agree. I think it'll be interesting to see how Masai and Bobby kind of approach, because there's going to be another player that's coming out, right? Or who
Yeah.
wants to leave, and who they pick, and is it another wing? Is it kind of a yeah? So it'll be interesting to see how they kind of approach it. I think for me personally, I think a big kind of part about this year is Scotty Barnes and how much he grows and or kind of his and so I wanted to just ask kind of what you think his ceiling is and what do you kind of expect for him this year?
So when we talk about his ceiling, are we talking about for this season or
In
just as a whole?
general,
In general?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I think he is a potential MVP candidate.
wow, okay.
I think he's that good. I think he's flat out special. That's part of why I think this team can win 50 plus games this year.
Mm-hmm.
And everything I see from him like screams winning, right?
Yeah, yeah,
He looks like the type of player that can control games. That seems so like when you watched that first half against
yeah.
Philly
I was
in game
thinking the
one,
same thing. I was
it's
thinking
like everything just seemed to funnel so beautifully through him. And the fact that this guy's almost getting a triple double in his first game, and if it wasn't for the injury, he probably gets it. I think that spoke volumes to me. And I mean, it basically reaffirmed what we were seeing, especially in the second half of the regular season, right? I think in that first half, we definitely saw some ups and downs. We saw lulls defensively, and we saw maybe, some of the taking possessions off that Fred VanVleet kind of called out publicly. And so
yeah, yeah.
I think he definitely grew over the course of the second half of the season. And now I think he's going to be like this freight train in terms of like chasing that ceiling. I genuinely believe. I mean, I said this a couple of weeks into the season last year that I believe by the end of his rookie contract,
Mm-hmm.
he will be good enough to be in all NBA conversations.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So that's what, 2 years from now, like in three
Yeah.
seasons. Yeah. Yeah. I'm very high on him too. I think for me it's really just how good of a scorer does he become, right? Is he 20 points a game,
Mm-hmm.
kind of bully ball, or can he become an ISO scorer? It's kind of, I was going to ask you about OG, but I think that's kind of with OG you find, well, he still can't really create for himself, right? And obviously OG is a much better shooter, but I feel like that's where you take him from. He has everything else. That's where he's an MVP candidate. Or if he becomes an adequate shooter, adequate off the ball shooter,
Yeah.
then it's maybe more like all like maybe all NBA third team rather than all NBA second, first consistently, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think that's an extremely valid point. I do think the shooting needs to come along, and with him, if he can just be a reliable catch and shoot guy, I think that's good enough. And then if he can build out that mid-range isolation scoring, that post up isolation scoring, some of which he already has, like he has beautiful touch around the basket.
I just that just to go off that, I don't understand how he does it. He's turning around kind of maybe 10 feet away and he's not looking at the rim, and I don't know how it always goes in. It's crazy. Anyway, I didn't want to interrupt you, but
No, you're absolutely right. Like we're both like picturing the same things, right? Like
Mhm.
those moves that he has around the basket, you don't expect that from a rookie. And so that's where you see that potential for greatness, that specialness that he has in him. And so it's sort of building out the rest of his offensive game. And I think he and Pascal complement each other so well. And there's going to be opportunities where, obviously we see uh not enough of it, but we see some Pascal Fred pick and roll action and how effective that can be. I could absolutely see with how good of a shooter Pascal is from the corner three, Scotty and Fred running pick and
Yeah.
roll and Pascal in the corner. And now if you've got OG or Otto Porter Jr. in the other slots, that's going to be very, very difficult to defend. And I think if Otto Porter Jr. can play 60 plus games, 55 plus even, just sit out the back to backs, who cares? Um, I think the Raptors will be in a really good place.
I definitely agree, and I think I guess my last kind of Raptors question before we go, just because Siakam and Fred, I don't know if they're the same age, but they're basically the same age, about 28, 29. Do you think for those two players that we've kind of seen their ceilings? Like, do you think that they can improve dramatically, or are they kind of who they are at this point?
I think Fred has like a few improvements he can make, especially as a passer. And I
Okay.
think operating in the pick and roll, he showed some good strides last year, I thought. Especially one thing that he had added that we saw in the first half of the season that kind of went away in the second half, and maybe it was some of that was losing that burst to
Yeah.
create that space, was that mid-range pull-up that he was
Yeah.
going to. And he seemed very comfortable with that in the first half of the season. Um, and so I think if we can see a bit more of that, it'll be good, because I think one thing I would accept at this point is that he's never going to be a great finisher at the rim.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so if he's driving to the basket, it's mostly going to be for kick out opportunities. And with Pascal, I think he has the opportunity to improve around the margins, but those margins are what separate, as you were alluding to earlier, someone being an all NBA third team guy versus second, first team.
Mhm.
And so I think over the course of Pascal's career, we have asked this question multiple times. Is this the ceiling? Is this the ceiling? Is this the ceiling?
Yeah.
So I wouldn't rule out him getting to that next level as well, where he is flirting with, maybe for a couple months, we're talking about him the way people talked about DeMar DeRozan for those couple months in Jan and Feb.
Yeah.
And he's like in MVP conversations and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And I think Pascal is a better player than DeMar DeRozan.
Yeah.
Is just about, maybe getting that level of appreciation for his game.
Yeah. No, I think what you said was a great point. I tend to agree. I think could he maybe be a 25, 8-5 more than 22, 8-5? Or I'm just throwing out numbers. I think the biggest thing for me is his passing games just got so much better, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing with the player like that. And that's why I'm not that worried about, not that I don't think anyone in Raptors land is worried about Scotty Barnes, but you can tell he has the passing. It's maybe could he do more pick and rolls and stuff like that? But overall, that's the thing that Siakam's got so much better, and that's why he is an All NBA player, right?
Yeah.
And I totally agree. I think just to kind of wrap up the NBA portion, I just wanted to know what you thought about the season going forward, and kind of what teams you kind of expect to probably be at the top, and maybe if there's a sleeper that you think people are kind of obviously sleeping on.
I think, the Clippers are going to be a huge threat this season. I think they've made the right additions. I think even, that trade last season,
The
it made
Powell.
them better down the stretch, but it really beefs them up for this season with Powell and Covington in the mix. I think when you look at the Memphis Grizzlies having the experience that they had last year and pushing the Warriors, I think that will give them a lot of confidence. I mean, not that they're not already a confident bunch.
Yeah.
uh,
That's not their problem. Yeah.
yeah, I think they will be a team to watch out for. I get a bad feeling about Phoenix. I think there's just so much going on behind the scenes, on
Especially
the roster with the DeAndre Ayton situation. How
Robert
much
Sarver.
longer? Yeah, exactly. How much longer can Chris Paul keep playing his best? So I feel like we could see a bit of a drop off from them. The Warriors will be the Warriors.
Yeah.
And so I think the Mavs will be interesting to watch if they can be in that, true upper echelon. I don't know if they're ready to or good enough to win a Western Conference Finals yet.
Yeah.
Like definitely they're good enough to win a round or two, but I don't know if they've made the changes. Like losing Brunson at the end of the day is a big deal.
Yeah.
For when you look at what he meant to that team. And then Christian Wood will be
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we can leave it at that. And then in the East, I think Milwaukee and Boston are the top two. And then after that, it could really play out anyway. I mean, if I had to bet, I'd probably say Philly as 3 because of the upgrades they've made to their bench. Whether it's, Melton, PJ Tucker, now getting Montrezl Harrell as well in there. So I think they've made important improvements, and then we have to see how much offseason work James Harden has put in.
Yeah.
So if I had to pick a team to be third right now, it'd be them. And then after that, I really think it can play out anyway. I think Miami's had a bad offseason.
Yeah.
And then Brooklyn, they're just
that could be a sleeper, but I might want to
yeah,
sleep on them anyways, if that makes any
yeah,
sense. Yeah.
yeah.
I
I'm not that as high on Atlanta or Cleveland as some are.
Okay.
Like
I
I do believe the Raptors are better than them.
I think Cleveland, I just like Garland and Mobley so much that I think I'm pretty high on Cleveland. For me, I don't maybe even put them third. I don't like Philly. I just
Wow.
don't trust Harden right now. Now in the regular season, they have a better bench, so that obviously more for the playoffs. I don't like them as much. But I think I like Cleveland a lot. Again, I think for me, it might be weird to say. I feel like Milwaukee, if they're healthy, are the favorites in the East. I
I
think
agree.
I think with you looked at that Boston series, they would have won if they had Chris Middleton. People don't say it, but
Yeah.
it kind of I think that's true. So I completely agree. I think the Warriors will be really good. The Clippers, I will believe it when I see it. I think you're right what you said on paper. They should be as good as Golden State, but they haven't been healthy for a single playoff round, or when they were, they
Yeah.
didn't do so well. So anyways, I've had you for so long, so I want to just
So one quick thing I just wanted to add with Milwaukee
yeah.
is I think people are forgetting that part of the injury issues they had were because Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton went straight from winning the NBA championship to
Yeah.
the Olympics and then back into training camp. And
No.
now again, a bunch of these teams that maybe haven't been healthy, this is like their first proper off season in 3 years.
Yeah, I was about to say, because with the COVID, the bubble season, and then quick into it, and then last summer with the Olympics, I think that's an excellent point, and I think it'll be a really fun season. I think that's like I'm really excited because there's so many good teams. There's going to be a lot of teams tanking for Victor, but at the same time, like you look at the East, like when are like the Raptors are just going to be playing exciting games all the time. Like even
Yeah.
like Orlando, like they'll be fun to watch. I like really like Wagner. I can't say his name, and obviously Paolo and stuff. So I
Might
just
as well
want
call it the AL East.
yeah, exactly. Oh, that's another story. I just wanted to end off a little bit about United, and then I'm again, thank you so much for coming on. We're both, just so people know, are United fans, which is a tough life right now, with everything going on. And I just wanted
Yeah.
to know, they obviously had a really, they for fans who don't know, they had a terrible first two games, and they've kind of rebounded a little bit and got some money in, or some signings in. So I just wanted to know how you think about the team, and they have a new manager, Eric Ten Hag, kind of how you feel about his philosophy and the team so far.
So I'm a huge believer in Eric Ten Hag.
Okay.
In fact, so internationally, I'm a Dutch supporter.
I know, yeah, that I can you explain that a little bit for us, if that's okay?
Yeah, so actually, my mom has worked for KLM, the Dutch airline,
Yeah.
for over 30 years.
Oh, wow.
And so when I was a little kid, like she would bring like Dutch memorabilia every once in a while, and I guess I just kind of got attached to them.
Hmm.
And then I mentioned 98 was the first World Cup I watched. And so they got to the semis that year,
Hmm.
and Dennis Bergkamp scored this incredible goal
Yeah.
against Argentina. And so that just built up my affection to another level. And so I've been rooting for them ever since. Um, some heartbreaking losses,
Yeah.
especially 2010 and
And I
2014.
remember that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's where my Dutch fandom comes from. Um, and so because I believed in Eric Ten Hag so much and liked him so much, and disliked the Glazers, I actually didn't want Ten Hag to come to United
Okay. Interesting. That's an
because
interesting
I thought it was a bad career move.
move. Yeah.
Um, and so when he took on the challenge, I was happy that he's at United, but I was also a bit skeptical of how the Glazers would treat him. And I think um, it's been very encouraging to see his philosophy already sort of bringing out some results. But I'm not ready to go into the deep end yet because I feel like I've seen this movie before where the
Yeah.
Glazers have shelled out money in the first year of a manager in the past. But all of a sudden, if you get back into Champions League or whatever it is,
And
second year that money's not there, third year that money's not there, and then they're gone,
yeah.
right? And so I, the biggest thing is I'm enjoying watching them play
I was gonna say
again.
I find them, like they'd win under Ollie, but you never
Yeah,
felt they had a game. Like they in terms of they'd be consistent through
right.
phases of play. And even like yesterday, like they didn't play a great team, but they at least like you kind of the whole time you're like they're gonna win,
Yeah,
right? And even with Ollie, like I found, and they just you never trusted that they could win or they'd play well, right? Like they play well on
yeah.
spurts. So um yeah, and
And with Ten Hag, like I love that he's willing to make those brave decisions,
yeah.
right? Like dropping Maguire, completely dropping Ronaldo. And it's like, hey, at the end of the day, it's about my philosophy. It's about how I want this team to play. That no one is bigger than the team, which I don't think a manager has been willing to say for a little while.
I can't
Um,
think of a United manager since Fergie that would have been like that, really.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I I think that's a big thing for me as well in sort of setting that precedent again.
Hmm.
And that's part of why I think you're seeing things fall into place because if you're a younger player, uh, whereas maybe before you were looking and saying, hey, it doesn't matter what I do, this player is senior to me and they're going to get the opportunity. Now you see hey, if you do exactly what this manager wants, you are going to get playing time.
Yeah, no, maybe a little bit of a Donny Van de Beek kind of vibe with what you just said. Um, well, so thank you so much for coming on. I just wanted to know kind of what anything going forward that you're working on. I know you mentioned a little bit about One Piece. Is there anything people should kind of expect from you, or anything that you're working on?
So I'll have like kind of preview stuff for the Raptors coming up,
Mm-hmm.
building into media day, and then just cover the team from there. So really excited for this season. And then beyond that, hopefully we'll get to do some type of World Cup coverage
Mm-hmm.
when that comes around, and try to juggle those schedules and
Yeah,
see
yeah.
how that goes. As a cricket fan,
I know
it's going
there's
to
been.
be pretty intense because there's the T20 World Cup coming up, towards the end of October. So
Mhm, mhm.
that's going to be an interesting time juggling all of that.
I don't know. I definitely understand. That's awesome, and is I guess just I hope you get to cover a bit of the World Cup, because I think that'd be pretty cool, especially with Canada. I was gonna ask, I guess, just what would
I
you
think I'll
talk?
do like my own content regardless. Like if I don't get any opportunities with
Mhm.
uh, a major outlet, but ideally, yeah, it'll be with an
I
outlet.
guess just to send off, if the Dutch play Canada, I know it's probably unlikely because of the draw, but when the draw happened, what were you thinking? If they played each other, what would you do?
So this is, I think I would be happy with either outcome.
Okay, yeah.
I know that's a diplomatic answer,
No, no, I understand. Yeah.
but uh, I think one of the reasons I might slightly root for the Dutch still is because I'd see the Dutch as potentially winning the World Cup,
Yeah.
right? And I don't think Canada's there yet.
No.
Um,
I was lucky enough to go to the game they clinched, and like it was crazy scenes, but yeah, they're not winning the
but I
World
mean,
Cup.
hey, the way the draw is right now, if Canada were to play the Dutch, at that point you would start to say why not?
Yeah. It would be like the semis or something like that. I
Yeah,
haven't checked the draw. Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
so yeah, I think major stakes I would root for Canada.
Hmm.
Um, because yeah, you'd say why not, but yeah, in like the building stages, I'd probably say the Dutch because like they'd have more potential.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Vivek. I really, really appreciate it, and kind of helping me build this new podcast. So I really appreciate it. And just so listeners of Behind the Play know, I have two guests coming up in the next week or two. So stay tuned. Pretty interesting people coming on. Not as interesting as Vivek though. But anyways, thanks so much for having me. Coming on. Sorry, and hope to talk to you soon.
Yeah, this was great, Alex. I had a great time. So anytime, happy to chat.
Thank you so much, and see you guys next week.